Why are we seeing a surge of interest in pop culture around biblical giants? Hey, I'm Jordan, and this is the Bible and Archaeology podcast, the place for conversations and questions about the lands, civilizations, and archaeology of the Bible. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Brian Doak for a conversation about giants. Now, we're going to cover a lot of ground in this. We are going to, on the one hand, look at some of the biblical roots of giants. Where do they show up? And what are they doing in the biblical text? Then we're going to turn to some historical considerations to see how giants have continued to play a role for different communities over time, and ask the question, why? What roles are they serving? What are they doing for the communities that continue to turn to them? And then we'll go to a little bit of a modern topic in looking at the connection between giants and conspiracy theories today. Why are giants showing up in these theories? What are they doing? And what are they actually there for? Remember, for early access to ad-free video podcasts and exclusive bonus content, you can join us over on Patreon. So settle in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation all about giants. Dr. Brian Doak, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today to talk about giants and the internet and videos and conspiracies and all of the web of things that this topic entails.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much, Jordan. This is so fun. Thank you.
This is an odd topic. I think someone coming into this thinking, wait a minute, doctor, and you're studying giant videos on YouTube, and that's you can get away with doing that?
You know, it's funny. I have a book about this, about giants in the Bible. And one of my earlier attempts to popularize this years ago, I had written an article for Bible and Interpretation Online, which was called something like The Embarrassing and Alluring Biblical Giant. Because there is a kind of embarrassment with the topic for scholars, particularly, I mean, you either kind of like have to embrace it and go with all the bonkers kind of stuff, or you kind of like, you know, as one of my colleagues once put it, you're just saying like, you know, you do like as a professor, you might do like intro to the Old Testament, intro to the Hebrew Bible, and saying like students just get caught up on like Genesis 6:1-4, and they don't want to talk about anything else. And it's almost like embarrassing because it's like, it's an odd passage that even within the Bible itself is like a little hint of like mythology or something like that. And it's tied to these giant things, and it becomes like an embarrassment, like, yeah, let's get past that. And for students, like, and for this giants topic in general, as I'm sure we'll discuss, one of the topics that just comes up for people is like, so did that happen? Like, were these real? And that's where it gets embarrassing, because like scholars often, and even Christian scholars like myself, have like, you know, complex and nuanced views about history and belief and, you know, hard things like that. And it's like, it's kind of hard to explain. I guess that's the teaching task, but it is actually difficult. And so it becomes like almost this kind of embarrassment, like you'd rather not bring it up. So, you know, I don't know. I can't explain it.
And meanwhile, the audience is like clamoring for you to spend a moment to explain it.
Yep.
And into that void step all of these people so eagerly and willingly through the thing that is YouTube to fill that void and give you an explanation of giants. So before we get to that, can we backtrack quickly? Because you threw out Genesis 6 here. And I think maybe this is helpful framing when we're talking about giants in the Bible. Some people might have that reference in their mind and some might not. And just, you know, the mind can go to Goliath.
Sure.
So when we're talking about giants in the Bible, who or what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine to just use a very popular definition, like a giant is some unusually tall, you know, person. Although even if you say person, there's this idea, even in like the medieval period, and there was an immense interest in giants in medieval Christian Europe, for example. The giant might not even be human. You know, it might be like partially human, or some people then would just expand the category immediately even into basically any huge living thing. So like Leviathan or something like that. And Job, any like massive, you know, or even you could even start thinking of things like the Tower of Babel, like any attempt to go too high. So one way to define the giant that I like is it's almost like a creature that's too big on biblical terms, something that's too tall. Like, to be tall, you know, it's like, think of Saul, for example, in the book of 1 Samuel. He's stated to be head and shoulders taller than other people. And it's almost like a good thing in that kind of contest for the throne. But, you know, you almost start to wonder, because like height is actually a problem in the Old Testament. Like God does not like tall things. You
Right.
start reading Isaiah, like chapters 1 and 2, particularly Isaiah 2, and it's almost like this competition. Like you cannot be, like God can be the only giant. God can be the only tall thing. All the tall things must be cut down. Like you think of like the Tower of Babel, too high, too big, or, in Isaiah, the prophet's getting upset about these trees or mountains that might claim to be too high over and against the Lord. And so these things have to be chopped down. They have to be cut down. So it's almost like giant in the Bible, you could say, is almost like a moral category. There's no word like just an obvious Hebrew word that's like giant, but you see kind of this pattern with the thing with the too big is like someone that's too big, but combined with negative moral qualities.
So it becomes that larger classification within it brings an immediate mental picture to your mind, but does that moral side or that good and evil aspect of it, do you feel like that carries over still when we're coming to the modern fascination of it? Is that like latent within the way we talk about the giants, or are they just more of this spectacle of what is this and mystery and secret?
Total spectacle, total mystery, totally secret. But yes, part of the allure is this kind of battle between good and evil, a very black and white kind of political theology, you might say. And I want to be able to talk about politics and political theology without making fun of anyone, without looking down on anyone. I also want us to be able to, just sort of revel in the spectacle at all and also laugh at ourselves. But I found that's a fine line. That's a hard line to walk with fans of this material, which I've interacted with on my own YouTube channel and also elsewhere. But yeah, it's a kind of political theology. Giants are a political theology in the Old Testament. They come up at really important moments, like they maybe whatever's happening in Genesis 6, this kind of hybrid moment, God has to cut them off with the flood. They come up at the conquest of Canaan or Israel or whatever, the land, and they have to be defeated in order for Israel to come occupy. And then with David, he has to like defeat Goliath as this sort of like, a barrier to get into the kingship. And then, of course, in the Second Temple Jewish literature, like the Enochic corpus, they get kind of pushed to like an end times scenario, if you could say. And they become almost like this spiritual battle. And I think, yes, you see that love of apocalypticism and of very black and white political theologies played out on giants in digital forms too. Yeah.
So does it seem like then a very natural fit that there is this surge of interest right now in giants, like in these periods of time where they get placed in the biblical chronology or eschatological chronology? Is there a companionship with this rise of pop culture interest and video interest in giants?
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm currently doing some exploratory writing for a book on this topic, which tentatively is called The American Giant. I'll share my thinking. That's my advertisement. That's my hype for my book in progress. I'll share my thinking at this time, but TBD. Okay, subject to change as long as I have that permission. But like,
check the book in the future. Well, when it comes out, you can find it down below.
Time travel into the future. Come back and see. Did I actually write about this? I think I'm thinking about it this way right now. I think there are like cultural zeitgeist kind of reasons, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there are very contemporary political reasons. And I think there are almost like tech reasons, like technological reasons. So just running through them, and maybe we could talk more about any one of them. Like there's a culture zeitgeist, like almost like an aesthetic reason. Like supernatural things have always been popular with people. Like, this, everyone knows this. But some of this giants lore, I think, almost has like a dark fantasy vibe to it. Like cryptozoology and Lord of the Rings and D&D, and these are very popular kind of gaming and engagement. So it kind of brings you into that world. Also has a certain like a masculinity to it, like masculinity, like a revival of masculinity on the internet's very popular right now. Theo Von and Joe Rogan, and like this idea, like, how to be like a real man and what is a man. There's a kind of warfare culture or a kind of prepper culture, this like defend God kind of idea. Like you could kill a giant. And then I think further, we have a culture of like apocalypticism. It's like this vaguely articulated feeling that anybody who is chronically online, like I am, sees people expressing like we're on the verge or the edge of something catastrophic or extraordinary. It's like AI and nuclear and pandemic, and there's an economic collapse. And it's like positioned weirdly between fear and almost like wanting it to happen. So like this old Enochic storyline, I'm speaking of First Enoch here, of course, where you have essentially, it's kind of like fan fiction based on Genesis 6. like unpacking like how all this happened. And it's a storyline of demonic giants at war with righteous angels. And that really resonated apparently with the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, I guess, and their worldview versus the Romans and also the Jerusalem priesthood. Like they were really into this kind of like us and them kind of theology, and the giants resonated with them.
Mm-hmm.
It resonates now with people who see like deep state and globalists or secret group XYZ, not only as an earthly enemy, which is one thing, but like also as a cosmic enemy. So like there's that. Okay, the political reasons. What were my 3 categories? Oh yeah, so like aesthetic, kind of like things that are going on right now. Then you have like political things, just like anti-authority, anti-institution things. I could go deeper into like what is anti-authority or anti-institution about this, but like one of the most popular giants conspiracies involves the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian suppression conspiracy is a classic anti-authority, anti-science, anti-institution conspiracy. Comes back to even problems from 100 to 130 years ago in American culture about evolution and creationism. You have like a do your own research kind of mentality, or look how I've seen this a lot too recently. This came up in a recent Joe Rogan podcast that was very controversial because the guest was accusing Joe Rogan of like engaging in this kind of nonsense. And they were like defending it by saying, look, we see in culture now just like how frequently we've been lied to. We've been lied to. So like, how else have we been lied to? So it like leads to like this challenge of authority. And then you're like, well, maybe this is true. And what about UFOs? And what about demons? And what about, what about cryptozoology and creatures that might have survived, a catastrophe? And then I think finally, I'm just ranting and raving here. This is stock for the giant conversation. You got to rant and rave about this, okay?
It's perfect. I mean, these are all fascinating.
So and finally, I will say there's also just I think a hardware, like a technology reason. The algorithm rewards shock and stimulation and exaggeration, and so these mystery videos and conspiracies just like it like works really well. And when you get rewarded for something, I mean, I know this on my own puny YouTube channel. By the way, put a link below, subscribe. I talk about this kind of stuff all the time there. Like if I title a video like, hey, just some like scholarly thinking about, versus like ridiculous giant conspiracies and the losers who believe in them, like you're obviously going to get like 4,000 views versus like 250 views on my own, in my own context. And so I would be rewarded for like amping certain kinds of things up. And like, giants, they're huge. They're interesting. UFOs, demons, this kind of stuff. So I think there's like a tech, almost like a kind of technological like determinism built into this that rewards it.
Yeah. And within those, like, do those feel like the same type of draws that have always existed around this topic and just continue to shift to match the changing political landscape or technology fears or cultural aesthetics of the time? Or do they seem to morph and some, slough off over time and a new thing takes the place to make the giants fit the need of the people that are coming to them?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a complicated question. I mean, I think it's helpful just to recognize that interest in giants is an old trend. Like it's not something that people just invented, 15 years ago with YouTube. I mean, the Bible has these odd little digressions and points of, I don't know what you call it, like esoteric interest in giants. Yeah, Genesis 6:1-4, where like giants are not really mentioned, but a lot of people connect it with that, with the idea of the Nephilim, and then the Nephilim, their descendants are somehow in the land in Numbers 13. But also like in Deuteronomy, I mean, these often skipped over chapters like Deuteronomy 1-3, particularly chapters 2-3, have this like almost like this primitive anthropology or something like that. Maybe that's not the right term, but a kind of like antiquarian interest there on the part of the author in terms of like what are these groups of giants called? What are their names? What did different groups call them? You have this King Og who has this bed or tomb, depending on how people translate the word there, but like a fixation on how large the body was, a fixation on the artifact. So it almost has, I mean, this is a stretch to compare it to YouTube, but it's almost like a kind of, in Deuteronomy 3:11, where that's mentioned, the bed or the tomb, there's almost like this kind of exhortation, like, come, look and see, almost like a carnival kind of like, come in the tent, look and see, you can see this bed today, it's here. And so I do think that, I don't know, it feels like a thread that goes back. Does that seem too much to you?
I think so, because you can imagine the YouTube video that is like, we found a giant's bed. That feels
absolutely
like something you would absolutely see now. And very similar, if you want to change the little heading that you have in your Bible, if you're going back through and you're like, I'm going to update King Og's bed to say this,
Yeah.
it feels like it draws on the same
Totally.
kind of sensationalism that text is going to have for communities.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, the giant, because the giant could be seen to dwell at some kind of like creepy boundary between what it means to be a human, but also more than a human or less than a human, the giant can become a point of meditation or fixation about a pretty like universally asked question, namely, what does it mean to be a human? So like Walter Stevens has this book, famous book in the field of giant studies called Giants in Those Days. I think it was published in the 1990s, like 1994 or something like that. And he claims there, I think right away, like in the introduction, that the giant was actually the touchstone of anthropology in the medieval period. Like it was one of the very bedrock things that you talked about when you talked about what is a human.
That's so fascinating. Like, because they feel like, yeah, both the thing that is here and not here,
Right.
and they're too big, but we like some things that are big, but almost too much.
Yeah.
Do you think when we're looking at something like the King Og story or the Nephilim,
Right.
and the way that they are drawing on the sensationalism or the interest that they know they're going to have here, does the Bible intend for those stories to be believed? Do you think it has that expectation that you think they were real, or are they putting them in for something like just the sensationalism of the story and we're going to move things along?
I love it. I mean, those questions are like really hard and fascinating questions. I'm still thinking about them. So again, like give me a chance to like experiment. Or like I tell students, like sometimes in class or when we think academically, you could think of it like going to a store and like trying on outfits. And like you kind of come in and you like show them to people. It's like, I'm not going to wear this out of the store. Okay. Like I just want to see what you think. And so
Got to see if it fits.
Is this that kind of podcast? Can we do this here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah. So it's really difficult to answer questions like that about belief, especially if one belongs to and answers to a community of faith, which I do, Christian faith. It's difficult to address this without giving like an entire mini lecture on history, this word history and its relationship to words like belief and truth. But I'll say this, clearly for me, historically and also theologically, just because something is narrated in the Bible does not mean we must believe it to be in the modern Enlightenment genre of history, right? Like, I think this differentiation is bedrock. Like, it's important to acknowledge. Not everyone agrees with that, I have noticed. Okay, but so right there, right away, I don't think because something is narrated in prose or anywhere in the Bible that equates, that is an automatic, just naive, direct assumption that this is what we call the genre of history. I think it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Did the authors of these stories and notes about giants mean them to be believed, though? Yes, I think 100% they did. But this belief is not a one-to-one match with like, if you were there with an iPhone and a camera and like a thing having happened in history. I think, and this is just like a tentative way to start talking about this, but I'm also like pre-aware of the way that people think this is like demonic obfuscating by Professor Man. I think it's more like an emotional way of living in the story and its reality. There has to be some way to be very nuanced about this, about, I feel like there's like a Jordan Peterson meme about like, what does it mean that something happened, or something like that. But I think for people of faith in particular, that's important. I think for historians, can also draw on the complexity here. Like history, the word history has, in recent historiographic discourse, by recent, I just mean the last couple of decades, can mean really different things. Like it can mean what happened, like in a very positivistic sense, like if you were there with measuring instruments and tools and cameras. It can also basically mean the way a community remembers something, the way a community tells its own story to itself. The Dutch historian Huizinga, I think, had a famous definition like that, like the idea, history is the intellectual form in which a civilization renders account of itself to itself, or something like that. I probably got the quote a little bit wrong, but like you can hear that definition of history is actually kind of different from that positivistic, like what really happened? Did we dig up the bone? Can you measure it kind of thing? And so I think for people of faith, you got to get kind of savvy about this, and you have to think, so did the authors mean them to be believed? Yes. That to me, that's different though from saying, is this actually history?
Yeah, you have to ask the question of like, in what way and for what purpose within those things. Because something you will see frequently discussed with these is that turn to something like the ancient ruins of like, do giants fit a need of, if we're looking at something, that how did we build this? How is this so big? You have this also with Greek tradition, right? Like, do the gods help build walls that we don't understand? Like something more than us has to have built this. And so does a story step in to fill that, to explain our belief about something, how something came into being? And something like a giant can slot into this space because, well, we see people that are taller than me. This person is taller than me. Right. And if I see buildings that are so big, how do we, those, you can see a path potentially.
Yeah, who moved these big stones? I mean, you certainly have, like in Israel, Palestine, you have structures from the Bronze Age. A lot of them, I think, from the Middle Bronze Age. I'm not an archaeologist, so I'm just kind of freewheeling here. But like, you have these huge structures, and so you have like an ancient ruins theory of giants where people are motivated. I think that's what you're talking about. You also have someone like the classicist, I think her name is Adrienne Mayor. I might have that name wrong. I think so. She has a book called The First Paleontologists. I think it's called something like that, or The First Fossil Hunters. And she actually talks about the way that in classical Greece even, or there were these like limestone or chalk cliffs, and you could see dinosaur bones there. And they saw these bizarro winged creatures with teeth, and they made a conclusion which was not totally unreasonable. In fact, was absolutely 100% correct, that there were fantastical creatures that lived in the past. They might have been like scientifically and historically wrong about what those creatures were, but like stories like about the Minotaur and certain descriptions, she shows how they actually kind of oddly match these very visible fossils. So you have a fossils in ruins kind of theory. The Christian theologian Augustine actually draws on this. Like he tells a story in the City of God of like walking on a beach somewhere, and like they find a molar, a tooth that's like huge. And they're like, see? He's like, see? There were giants. In fact, one of America's like founding pastors, Cotton Mather, the Puritan preacher Cotton Mather, who lived in the 1600s, was famous for presiding over the Salem witch trials. He actually made a huge deal, like a big professional academic for his time and place deal, about bones that were discovered near Claverack, New York, which he wrote to a learned society in England right away and was like, we have an amazing discovery for you. And they were basically the bones of what we now know to be a prehistoric, like Ice Age mammoth in the United States. But they were like, these are the bones of giants who died in the flood. And so I do think, it's not the only explanation that people have, but yeah, you have people piecing that together. And I think there's a long lineage of that. And that's a fascinating storyline in and of itself, this fossils and ruins theory. Yeah.
Does the type of evidence that gets leveraged in the videos you might see now vary at all or significantly from that same type of evidence that might have been used in the past to support this?
Yeah. So in the paper, in the Journal of Religion and Popular Culture that just came out on these giant conspiracy theories on YouTube, but also in books. I mean, there are books about this too, which are fascinating. I hope we can talk about some of the books, but like in the videos, I mean, a lot of it is like the text of the Bible for sure. Like, and sometimes not much else, right? Just the text of the Bible and like montages with like spooky music. Like that's one way you can do it. There's no real what maybe people would, or maybe viewers of this learned channel would come to recognize as professional archaeology to speak of. Some people, though, I don't know if you knew this, Jordan, some people have an expansive definition of archaeology.
Yes, I have seen this before.
Okay, so, so maybe so it can rely on slick video editing, old-timey images that give a vibe. At worst, it's blatantly deceptive images. Like the favorite one, the one that you got to show, is the idea of like the skull, which you'd have like a tiny person sort of photoshopped or cropped in next to it. So it looks like the skull is like 10 feet tall.
Look at how big this thing is.
Look at how big this is.
We got a photo.
We have a photo. Can I tell you actually about one of my favorite videos on YouTube that highlights, I think, this problem of evidence that you're talking about. So there's a film. It's a great film. I totally recommend it. I was just writing about this film today for this book in process. It's called Big Man Japan, 2007. It's a mockumentary. It's super fun. It's kind of satirical. It's dark. It's comedic. It's about this guy in Japan who's part of like he's a third generation son of like a family of superheroes who they get this like electric shock by the Japanese Defense Department and they turn into a giant and they defend Japan against monsters that attack Japan. But the kind of mockumentary style is about showing how pathetic this guy's life is, how nobody likes him. He's kind of like a middle class, like loser. His wife left him, but like he can become this giant. And there's a scene in this where they flash back to like this old timey black and white, like CGI, like badly done footage of like his grandfather or his father walking down a street in a military parade. Somebody took this and just clipped that scene and put it on YouTube. The oldest and most popular one I can find, it's called Giant of Japan Military Parade. And it's from a content creator whose name just goes by George Hollick. He has almost no other videos except for vaguely anti-Semitic looking videos about evil Talmudic quotes. Talk about the anti-Semitic angle, because that's a fascinating one.
Mm-hmm.
But he just clips that and is like, he just shows that with some like kind of like driving music, and then has some text on screen like, see, Nephilim are real. And people have latched onto this video. It has almost 3 million views.
Wow.
People bring it up. And then now I know you're saying, you're like, okay, but dude, doesn't somebody go in the comments and just say, hey, this is from the mockumentary Big Man Japan? Oh yes, people do. But this now drives a double down on the video. Now people say, like, there's a content creator, I think his name is John Levy, has a very popular channel, has like 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. Must be really compelling to his audience. I'm not super into it yet. I haven't explored it, but he has a video in which he looks at it and he says, actually, what they did was they took a real video of an actual giant and like laundered it into the mockumentary to try to discredit it. And you can see like these little details, and it is not compelling from a video editing perspective in terms of the details. And, well, look, there's a shadow. And why would there be a shadow? Because it's like we know the people who made this. We know who they are. We know when the video came out. We know where it came from. Like, we know everything that can be known. And yet people will double down on this. And they're like, no, I think there's something here. So
because we don't believe what we have been told, and we lean into ask the more questions. And
exactly. This is why I think it's, and I write about this in the article. And then, people could disagree with this or think I'm trying to somehow like sane wash this kind of thinking. But I think there's something to it. It's almost like an aesthetic kind of discourse where the point is almost about entertainment and it's about stimulation. So there are 2 authors of conspiracy psychology who talk about this in terms of leaps and blurs, and another author who talks about it in terms of spinning. Like, you get a discourse going in which the success means you're able to just get another question kind of asked. And if you're able to kind of propel people on to the next episode, as it were, that's kind of like success within this aesthetic, almost like artistic genre of the conspiracy video. And I think there are ways of looking at conspiracy that way, rather than only or merely looking at it like, well, these people clearly are dumb, or these people are losers, or these people are socially disconnected. Those are very popular explanations for conspiracy culture. And they might be psychologically accurate or not. I'm not a psychologist. I don't think that they're the only way, though. I think that there's almost a kind of, I don't know, there's a kind of nobility, a kind of art form to it. And like, I mean, I don't know. Let me ask you, Jordan, like the people who make that Photoshopped image, right, of the small guy with the head, like what do they think they're doing when they do that, right? What do they think they're doing? Because they know it's not real. They're the ones doing it. They're the ones manipulating the thing, right?
And again, like, if I'm making that, I don't think I really expect people to find it to be compelling, but there's a perfect ecosystem to drop that thing in, which again, like I asked before about, does the biblical text expect people to believe, which is hard. And I feel like you have the same kind of question about this online, the video content, of the expectation of putting that out there of, is this mockumentary and no one is getting it, and I decide to just lean in and say, no, this is real? Or is this all AI generated and somebody's like, I can just throw a prompt into ChatGPT and have it give me a video that I'll slap up? Or is this leaning into a conspiracy lane, or somewhere in between, and the line just blurs back and forth? Because that conspiracy line that you touch on, I think, is something within this that can quickly shift a video from being something that you look at it and you go, oh, this is just a silly thing, to suddenly there are more sinister undertones that can be present inside the messaging of some of this. And you mentioned some already. So could we turn to that as well, of within this video space? And it's not totally removed, I think, from the other books or historic writings about giants as well. What's the relationship or the connection that exists between giants and some of that conspiratorial thinking?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the idea of the sinister undertones. I mean, what one person considers sinister, I realize others don't. I'm not, trying to peddle relativism here, but like people debate these things, right? Okay, but like I discovered that there's a book, in this research by an author named Laura Sanger. I actually, in the article, there's a typo. I write her name as Jennifer Sanger. It's Laura Sanger. Laura, if you're out there, I'm sorry I botched your name. I apologize for that. Laura Sanger. She's a rare female author, actually, in a world that's almost exclusively dominated by male voices, like the YouTube videos, the books. It's just like a heavily male industry. It's a heavily white male industry.
Interesting.
Yeah, very much. But so Laura Sanger is a rare female author in this space. She has a book called, what's it called? I think it's called like it's called The Roots of the Federal Reserve, Tracing the Nephilim from Noah to the US Dollar. Has hundreds of very enthusiastic reviews on Amazon. I actually purchased this book and read not all of the book. It's a tough book to get through. But this book basically, so, okay, how would you trace the Nephilim to the US dollar? Okay, well, Laura Sanger is very into this idea of like globalists who run the world economy. Oh no, you see where this is going. It's about Jews. It's about how Nephilim, in her telling, basically somehow escaped wherever they were and made it into Europe and like physically become integrated with people. This is where the Nephilim theories, and for authors who I think don't always intend it, actually become like racial theories. Because the idea is, if you read this material literally, and if these Nephilim did interbreed with humans, maybe there are still Nephilim on the earth today. And how would we know who they are? Maybe not by the fact that they're 30 feet tall or they can jump over buildings. Maybe we know them, as Laura Sanger says in her book, by having red hair or negative moral qualities, getting involved in like pedophilia. Oh no, it's a QAnon thing. She basically identifies these globalists as the same enemies that the QAnon audience had. So QAnon's kind of faded a little bit, but this was a big deal, like in 2020, for example, this QAnon thing. The idea that there was this global cabal of people who were victimizing children sounds a lot like the blood libel against Jews, an anti-Semitic motif in which Jews eat children and things like this. And she also cites the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, one of the most pernicious and famous anti-Semitic texts. And she says something like, don't ask who wrote the Protocols of the Elders of Zion or if it's really real. Just look at the themes and see how true they are. And this all gets like basically wrapped up in a story about giants. So giants can actually provoke a racial question. And those who get really obsessed with giants often find themselves kind of veering into this racial territory. So Cotton Mather, the Puritans, super concerned with like their identity versus Native Americans, for example. And of course you had the racial issues around slavery and the colonies. And so like, and this, as I mentioned, this George Hollick guy, it might be unfair to just point this out, but the guy who did the Giant of Japan military video, he has this like series on evil Jews and evil quotes from the Talmud. So it's kind of like there does seem to be something that kind of, kind of like lends itself to this kind of discourse, but this from the Nephilim to the Federal Reserve. So the idea is that the Nephilim actually created the Federal Reserve, which is this monetary system that's controlling the world. It gets into paranormal stuff. She's really into like sound and like vibrations that created frequencies that created things. And it's a lot. People can research this, of course, and get into it. And wouldn't be shocked to have commenters on this video when it goes on YouTube, talk about the wickedness of the non-Christian that I am, pointing something like that out, because there's a community around this. And you really could begin to almost identify a kind of Nephilim spirituality type thing that emerges. So that's one direction. So I am concerned about the anti-Semitic root. And actually the Journal of Religion and Popular Culture editors, they were so bothered by this that they actually asked me to make a note at the end of the article to just make it perfectly clear that I wasn't advocating for those things, which I was happy to do because I'm not advocating for those things. But like, it just shows you how sensitive actually some of the stuff can become.
And how quickly, how you go from that title to where you end up within that, just the layers of the way it draws on all of these things that you've laid out from past discussions and what's coming up at these different points, how easily someone can just, if you're looking at that leaps, blurs, and spinning type of thing of just move from one of those points to another one of those points and don't look too quick, don't look too close, but like, let's move to another point of the video format seems to be a almost wickedly good companion.
Oh, yeah.
To something like a book where you're going to have to spend more time working through and reading. Whereas if I'm watching a video, if it's just a video, you can throw in pictures that you've doctored or clips from things and text, and the cuts can kind of just lead you one to another, and the algorithm is great at getting you to another one.
Absolutely. We love video. We love it. We love film. We love television. yeah, this is why I think it is productive now to start talking about, I think it's one way. It's not the only way. This is not the only frame, but like one frame within which we could view these are the kind of aesthetic viewership entertainment frames by which we would analyze, a TV show or something like that. Now, the fact that they happen to intersect with like this much larger world of conspiracy belief and so on, there are other frames now too. But yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, YouTube is like so dominant. I mean, I see why Google's been on trial for having a monopoly. I mean, it's like, what's the alternative to YouTube? Like Vimeo? Like, where else are you going to go? And I mean, the user statistics on YouTube are just like bonkers. It's like 3 billion unique sign-ins per day or something like that. Like, how many people are even in the world? Is like a third of the world signing into YouTube every day?
Everybody's on YouTube every day.
And the algorithm, right? The algorithm is so powerful. Like the algorithm, it becomes like this kind of like, well, and I think actually this is a kind of Giants theme. It's a Genesis 6:1-4 theme. The idea that there are like heavenly councils that we cannot see that are determining the petty affairs of humans down below. People have a legitimate feeling like that socially and spiritually and politically, even this idea like we're living in a world that we don't even control anymore. We can't even see, there's this idea like that you have like billionaires and secret cabals of people making deals and Jeffrey Epstein's and flight logs and, people and some of this stuff. What's wild is like, take the QAnon conspiracy, the idea that, Democrats are basically eating children and doing all this kind of horrible stuff. It's like, well, there are some people who are actually kidnapping and abusing children. Like that's literally what Jeffrey Epstein and all that stuff was, and that island and the plane. And people are like, yeah, who was there? And what's the flight log? It's like, we kind of know that things like this actually do happen. And I think there's a kind of like legitimate emotional or even moral core to people who get into this where they're like, yeah, let's get into that. I think, if you were going to get into this from like a political or justice oriented angle, it would be like, let's find actual, real, like literal, provable instances of horrible things that we can stop in our world. Not this kind of like, I don't know, like bizarro world of like heavenly councils and demonic beings. It offers a kind of way out because you don't have to actually confront it.
Right.
You can actually just kind of like, you can just be like, and you don't have to actually listen to authority. You don't have to actually do learning. You don't have to actually do the research and spend the time. You can just say, the Smithsonian, what a joke. What a bunch of losers. They're hiding the giant skeletons. Oh, professors, they don't know what they're talking about. They're all atheists and they're just trying to like ruin the world. And really what you need is a kind of spiritual discernment, which all of us can have, any of us can have if we just believed the correct things about this esoteric world. And so, yeah, now we're back to the anti-authority, threads there. I don't know. I'm just rambling, but this
and
is
it does. It does. At the one hand, like you feel like you've identified something, like you've cracked the code and you have the answer now.
Right.
But yeah, also relieves you from having to do anything about it because they're there or they're it's the giants, but I have the solution, and then the solution is just me knowing this and maybe making a video about it. So take this thing from here and you can know about it too. But it's this odd like insider and no action, but feel like I have taken action, but then leads to more rabbit holes being created that lead you to all kinds of other things. That just the feedback loop is a part of this that is just mind-boggling to try to consider. Before you even bring back some of that like embarrassment part that you talked about before of, well, why don't scholars want to get in to talking about this? Why not? I think you're probably a person who has some experience as far as like, well, why, what are the things that keep people from trying to speak to or correct or adjust the way some of this is happening?
Well, as I was talking before about this problem, even just take this basic issue of like history and belief and reality and truth. Like, does history, the genre of history, have a particular relationship with the idea of truth? And like, how do you tease that out? That's stuff for like a really good intro to theology class. That's stuff for a really good biblical studies class. You could do it in a public setting from a non-sectarian standpoint, or you could do it from a Christian perspective in a classroom like that, or in a seminary. Like, but I think, and some people really have an appetite for that. They want to get into that. They want to think about that. Other people, though, they're like, it almost like just breaks something inside of them, and it just becomes very, so I think for professors, like if you want to wade into that, and if you want to do it publicly, like on YouTube, for example, have a YouTube channel and talk about this, you basically then open yourself up. And if you have your comments open, like, I mean, I have a YouTube channel, yours is much bigger, much better, but like, you know how this is, you open this up and it's like, hey, dude, like I'm actually a real person. And like you're talking now, you're like accusing me of things. You're like calling me like, I mean, just the bizarro things that people say. I mean, maybe some of these things are bots. Maybe these aren't even real people. Maybe like who even knows, right? But it's like you open yourself up to that. And I think in some settings, maybe even you could say in Christian education settings, like in churches or maybe synagogue, it just depends, right? Like you're opening yourself up to have a nuanced discussion of something where the appetite might be from a particular individual for something just, just very visceral and just on,
Yeah.
There's a story in American religion about why did the main line fail? Think and Stark, classic textbooks, like Presbyterians and Lutherans and all these denominations that used to be so big throughout the 20th century. They fell off in the second half of the 20th century. What happened? Whereas like evangelicalism and Pentecostal groups, they just have blossomed and bloomed at different times. They've been very entrepreneurial. Sometimes I wonder, and I'm not a historian of American religion, so people will have to forgive me, but like, I just wonder if in some ways, the kind of faith expressions that we now call evangelical or fundamentalist, they really work because they capture something of like just a very direct heart appeal. Like you think about something in the Bible, like the resurrection of Jesus, like what's a more hot-blooded direct appeal to be like, hey, like Jesus is alive and is here to like basically help you become alive. And, versus saying, well, the gospel stories, it's kind of about the friends we made along the way, if you know what I mean. And, it's like Jesus is kind of like in the tree and in your heart and in the world. And it's like, mainline type churches kind of got into that latter type approach, whereas fundamentalism preserved that very direct. I think there's something about American spirituality that just loves that direct connection. For scholars, though, sometimes that direct connection, even if one is a traditional Christian type, which I am in so many ways, it's like, yeah, but there's something like complex and you want to do archaeology and you want to do all these other things. And it's just like, it just depends on the audience. Like sometimes people really like that and sometimes they don't.
You mentioned the potential specific nature of American spirituality. With the giant videos, from what we can tell about who's making them or where people are consuming them, is this an American phenomenon or is this a global phenomenon? This interest in, the one with the Federal Reserve feels very American. The QAnon connections, maybe not purely American or only American, but largely rooted there. Is this return to giants an American thing?
This is the argument I'm toying with for this book in progress, The American Giant, is that there is something specifically American about it. Now, when you get into using this term American, like I'm going to be presenting next month at Notre Dame at a Society for Early Americanists conference, where I'm among people who are like very persnickety about the way you use the word American. Like, what do you mean? And what is America and what? So I tread, it's like I'm walking on fire here around this term American with scholars, but I do think there's something kind of American about it. I think there's something American about just that directness of belief and the kind of, there's something very specific about our political moment, the way it's fused with Christianity. And I'm still trying to tease out what that is. I would not in any way, though, limit this to America. Like I had some people commenting on my academia.edu page. I made a post about my article the other day, and I had some people, I think they were talking about the Albanian language, which I know nothing about. And they were like, no, if you look back and there are giants, it's like this Eastern European kind of thing. And they were talking about the word Nephilim in Albanian, and it was clearly people who were maybe native speakers and so on. So I gather that there actually are communities across the world who are really into this. And I think just and I mean this like just in a neutral sense, in terms of like just folk belief in fantastical creatures. This is a worldwide trans-historical phenomenon, the idea that there are Bigfoot type creatures or creatures under the water. I think that you find this in every continent for all time. And so there's nothing particularly American about that. But I'm interested in the particular ways that this gets fused like with American politics, in particular, the appeal this might have to what people might call certain right-wing ideologies, for example, I think is worth is worth exploring. Or even like the anti-authority. People have connected that with the United States, that we have a particular, how did we get our start? 1776, we were like, no to the monarchy, right? Like we take authority and we smash authority. And there is something American about that. Maybe there's just something modern about that and maybe not American.
So TBD on that one, come back for future research. But it does feel like, with that connection on the one hand, makes very much sense for it to be a global concern.
Yeah.
but the specific expressions of it, like what form do those expressions take? If, YouTube is such a as you mentioned, global phenomenon
Yeah.
of where are these viewers coming from or who is making these videos is
Right.
an impossible thing to know unless you're the one uploading them, whether you can really see that type of information.
Right.
But it feels like something that could easily be tailored to fit the desires, the needs, the interests of different communities and find resonance with those
Absolutely.
different types of concerns, be they political or aesthetic or ideological. Because, what aesthetic do you want your giant to have might be different if you are creating that story for an American consumer versus someone else.
That's a good point. And I think it's appropriate to speak of consumer. In fact, in this paper I'm going to give at Notre Dame, I have in mind something like using the giant as a consumer-oriented product, and the way that the giant, and as the richest country in the history of the world, to think in terms of consumerism or consuming products is, I think, a helpful frame just to view anything. I mean, maybe it has a kind of like Marxist or economic type frame to it when you think in terms of like consuming and economics. But I'll even throw in here, I'm sure we're nearing the end of our time, but I can't resist slipping in the Smithsonian suppression conspiracy. This one's very popular.
Thank you for coming back to that.
I'll come back to it because this one strikes me as distinctly American, given, and I think one could find polling about how many Americans throughout the 20th century, now the 21st century, have like resisted explanations of human origins based on Darwinian evolution versus like young Earth, 7-day creationism, humans just came on the scene. And this could even be a legitimate theological debate among Christians, but like, consider this. So like the Smithsonian suppression conspiracy says that the Smithsonian actually uncovered bones of giants in Native American burial grounds, and that these Native American burial grounds were filled with the bodies of dead giants. Already there's a political frame here, the idea of like white Europeans coming to the promised land as Puritans thought of it, and like conquering a native population who are also then conflated with giants. Like, think about it. Okay, so the idea would be that these bones were uncovered and that the Smithsonian at its founding, in fact, one conspiracy theory even says that the Smithsonian was founded on the very basis of hiding these bones, and was
for that purpose.
For that very purpose, kind of like the idea like that Area 51 and the Air Force was actually created in order to cover up the Roswell event. And the idea being with the Smithsonian that they covered it up. Now here's what's fascinating, because it's like, if you're the Smithsonian, you got to put those babies on display. Let's show this. Let's bring people in. This is important visitor stuff, right? They don't show it though, because it is often claimed by those in this world that it would upset their view of human evolution. Now, why would it upset their view of human evolution? Wouldn't it actually problematize creation science type views even more? Because it would suggest that there are like races and breeds and varieties of beings that are like not accounted for. Well, no, they are accounted for. They're accounted for by scripture. And so I guess the idea is just that it would disrupt their consensus, scientific thinking, and thus they don't want to engage in it. And so this comes up over and over again. In fact, I posted a video about giants on my own YouTube channel just recently, and someone brought up the Smithsonian thing right away. So it's actually very popular. Now, think of the way that the Smithsonian represents like American science. It's in Washington, D.C., or really a series of museums. And it's like the official American museum that says, this is what we believe about science and history. And so right there, you just have such a big target for people to say, no, we do not believe that about science and history, right? So there is something that feels, as a lifelong American, there is something that feels American about that.
And they would be the perfect target then for, the authorities are going to cover, and the museum of all of those pieces just converge into one location that has giant bones in the basement, allegedly.
I hope it's clear as I say all of this that I have weirdly, and I mean, I'm not naive about dangers of anti-Semitism, about these racial tropes. Having said that, like, I do have a kind of fondness for the communities who believe in anything. I mean, it's just hard to be a person of faith in any era, but today. And I have a lot of fondness for people creating entertaining things on YouTube. But I think where it becomes complicated for me is as a scholar, where it's like, then I'm trying to embody this like very orderly scholarly process, what the Germans called Wissenschaft, this organized, almost scientific-like study of materials. And there just are a lot of clashes here, things I haven't even totally reconciled in my own heart or in my own research or in my own identity as a person. And I think rather than just only be embarrassed by these things, which I think I was like for a while, despite the fact that I chose this as a topic for my dissertation, in a way, not the conspiracy, but like giants in the Bible, I've just started to lean into it a little bit more because I'm like, actually, this is a way to talk to actual people about belief and about history. And, if one is willing to, dodge the fiery arrows of YouTube comments from people that you will never know or see, then you're in it, and it's kind of fun.
Well, Dr. Brian Doak, thank you for taking the time to walk through, skim over, I think, really some of the depths that are here. And there's a lot. So thank you for unpacking this. And if you are interested in more, I would say don't go type giants into the search bar on YouTube. Instead, there's links down below, one of them to the article that just came out, one to the YouTube page, to Brian's YouTube page here. You can go see more. Go and check that space before just typing in, did they find giants on YouTube, and seeing what you're going to find, because you'll likely go down a lot of these paths that have more problematic aspects with them than you might have suspected at first glance.
I really appreciate you having me on here and for engaging this bizarro topic, but one that's very popular and very fascinating.
I appreciate your insight and your willingness to join me in the embarrassment of talking about this, because I do think it's something we've got to do, or you just leave it for those other videos to take the place of. So, Brian, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Like, subscribe wherever you find us. It helps us. Hopefully it helps you stay in touch with us. But for all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, I'm Jordan. Until next time.